Okay, so we have Tucker Herring in the studio today. Tucker, you're the Vice President of, I believe, SBA Business Development at GBank?
Yes, sir.
So not only are you a lender, but you're also a lender that specializes in FedEx, right?
FedEx is 100% of what I do.
Perfect. Well, welcome to the studio today,
Thank you.
Tucker.
Appreciate it.
So before we get into all things SBA, I hear you're an SBA lender. Is that where your dream was? Is that how you started your life to be in the SBA, to be a banker, or how'd you end up there?
It's certainly an interesting journey. I've been involved in SBA since 2004.
Okay.
On the lending side since 2018, and took an uncharacteristic or just not a normal track to get to that point.
Yeah.
Started working with a national non-bank lending institution. That's when I was introduced to the FedEx space. And that's when I realized that the trucks that we see on the road are not owned by FedEx, and they're actually owned by contractors. I come from a family of entrepreneurs and got to the point where I really wanted to concentrate in a specific area. And now that for the last 3 or 4 years, I've really just specialized in FedEx because I want to make sure that the borrowers and sellers that I work with are having a great experience.
Yeah.
My goal is to minimize the number of bumps on the road. There's always going to be bumps on the road during the process. My job is to eliminate them, make them as infrequent and as small as possible. So it's a better experience for the people I'm working with.
Perfect. Yeah, and any entrepreneur getting into, whether it's FedEx or any logistics business or any small business in general, I know that often financing is one of those big hurdles that no one knows how to experience. So what we're going to do today a little bit is clarify and demystify some of the SBA in that process. And I'll give you the easiest question ever to start with. Can you finance FedEx deals?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely with SBA.
Okay. And because we do see that often where people will say, it's a cash only transactions, like no banks will entertain FedEx deals. So I think it's always nice to start there with is that reality?
Right. So it's providing SBA loans for FedEx contractors, not only existing but new contractors is 100% of what I do.
Yeah.
Also have dedicated underwriters and closers within the bank. So they're also very familiar with FedEx. We know the right questions to ask, the right documents to collect to make sure, again, that it's an easy and smooth process for the buyer and seller.
Okay. Let's I guess, take a step back for people who aren't familiar. We talk financing and lending and getting into the business, and then we're talking SBA in particular. So SBA is a financing path. What does the SBA even mean? What are we talking about when we
So
say
the SBA is obviously the Small Business Administration. The Small Business Administration doesn't actually make the loan. They guarantee a portion of the loan that the bank makes.
Okay, so the federal government is guaranteeing a part of the loan, and that makes it a different kind of path for financing?
Exactly, and it is a zero tax subsidy program that's funded by the lenders and the buyers and the organizations that participate in the program. So there are no tax dollars involved in SBA lending.
So it's just a fund that the government has set aside to kind of guarantee and allow loans that may not have been possible otherwise, basically?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. They're, because we can provide up to 100% financing on these transactions for existing contractors that are wanting to expand. There is a certain amount of the loan that is not secured, which is commonly referred to as an airball. Most banks are not willing to take on much of an airball when it comes to providing a loan.
Which is fair.
Sure. Because we know the space incredibly well, in part due to our relationship with Route Consultant, we're incredibly comfortable with that.
Okay.
Because we do know the space incredibly well, and we make it our job to constantly be learning about the space so that we can continue to do a better job at what we do.
Okay. So one of the things you just said there, you said the SBA is up to 100% financing. What are you talking about there?
So we can provide up to 100% financing on if you're buying out an existing partner.
Okay.
For an existing contractor that's looking to expand via acquisition, we can provide up to 97.5%.
Okay.
For a new contractor making an acquisition first time into the space, up to 90%.
Okay, so you're a first-time buyer, you're trying to get into the space for the first time, you only need 10% of the purchase price is what I'm hearing?
It's actually, the equity injection requirement is not based on the purchase price. It's, it's based on the entire loan project.
Okay.
The entire loan project is a combination of the purchase price plus working capital plus closing costs.
Okay.
So your total project is typically right about 115% of the purchase price.
Okay.
So if you're buying a business for $1 million, the total project's going to be about 1.15 up to about 1.2, just depending on a few different parameters.
Okay.
Something that's very important to us is to ensure that our buyers are set up in a very strong capital position once they make that acquisition. We want them worried about the operations.
Yeah.
We don't want them worried about, am I going to be able to meet payroll, right? So we include a full 4 weeks of working capital to all of our borrowers, so that way they can get through that first month.
Yeah.
Obviously, they get their first revenue from FedEx after 2 weeks, but we want to ensure that that is a smooth process for them and they can focus on what's most important.
Yeah, those first 4 weeks are the most exciting, I would say, as you're trying to build your foundations. Just knowing that your financial solubility is not one of your biggest problems is a nice to have for anybody.
Right. So on the acquisition, the up to 90%, that infers that at least 10% has to be an equity injection.
Okay.
At least half of that must come from the buyer. So a buyer can get into a business with as little as 5% equity injection.
Gotcha.
Obviously, that does require some seller financing, and there's some contingency on that. But you can get in for as little as 5%.
Okay, so $1 million deal. Let's, I know that there's working capital and closing costs. We know that changes the price, but I'm trying to do easy numbers. Let's say $1 million loan.
Right.
How about that? Yeah.
Right.
So $900,000 is what you all will fund, and then a buyer could potentially come with only $50,000, and the seller provide $50,000, and then we've got that $1 million, and that is a real scenario in terms of what a buyer. Okay.
All the time. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to what I said before of like, are these deals financeable? Yes. And then realizing that you don't need, 30% down to get into one of these. Obviously, there's conditions, but I think that's good to hear.
The SBA provides some outstanding advantages compared to conventional commercial lending. On the conventional side, they're going to be looking for a 25 or 30% down, and you're going to get a 5, maybe a 7-year term.
Yeah.
Whereas on an SBA loan, much lower equity injection requirement, and a full 10-year amortization with no prepayment penalties, no balloons. So that essentially creates the smallest monthly debt service that you're required to make.
Gotcha.
So an SBA loan very likely will have a monthly loan payment right around half as much as what a conventional loan payment would be.
Yeah, that's important to hear. So and I think you said no balloon. There's no required balloon, but I do know plenty of people who they see this 10-year payment. For the first few years, they kind of pay the normal payments, and then they make a big chunk payoff after that amount of time because there is no prepayment penalty, and that is huge. And is that standard across all lenders in the SBA space?
That's an SBA. Yeah, that's an SBA advantage.
Yeah.
Additionally, let's say you're 3 or 4 months in once you've purchased the business, and you find yourself flush with cash. You can notify our servicing department, let them know you're going to send in a lump sum payment, and then ask for that loan to be re-amortized once that payment's been received.
Okay.
Which then, on a go forward from there, their monthly payment's even lower.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, and I think all of this is really helpful to start to understand the steps you need as a buyer coming in. So I think let's start a little bit back. If you let's say, I'm an entrepreneur, I want to buy a business. What's my first step with you? What's the conversation? What are we doing first?
So whenever I receive an introduction from Route Consultant, I typically have a 20 to 30 minute conversation with the buyer. Talk about their background, how they became interested in FedEx, what is it that really draws them to FedEx.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about their financial situation in regards to what they budgeted for the project, what they want to do long term.
Okay.
Is this a one-time thing, or do you want to make this your legacy?
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about that. Sometimes we're talking about a specific business that they're looking at right then. Sometimes they're still looking and they're trying to find that right target, which is perfectly fine with me because I want to be able to help them on that journey. I speak with buyers that have $50,000 in the bank. I speak with buyers that have $500,000 in the bank. So they can approach, or what they can approach from a realistic perspective is very different.
Yep.
Someone with $500,000 in the bank can obviously pursue a much larger business.
Yeah, they have a lot more options.
They do.
We always say financing is a pathway. Cash is king in a lot of deals. So
Very true.
yeah. One of the things you mentioned, I really appreciate that you all provide kind of a guide and help on the front end too as people are thinking through this. You said help them find the right target. What are you thinking through with them? What's a good FedEx deal in your mind when you see it?
So what we're really, so much of it depends on, is this going to be their full-time job?
Right.
Or are they going to maintain an outside job and then manage the FedEx business as well?
When you're talking through with somebody, when you're thinking through different kinds of FedEx deals, what about a special deal stands out that you think, okay, this is a right fit, or maybe this is a wrong fit, a red flag when you're reviewing different FedEx deals?
I think it really depends on what their goals are.
Yeah.
Is this just kind of supplemental income, or is this going to be the driving force for the rest of their career?
Gotcha.
And really trying to understand that. Some people have a goal of making $100,000 a year. Other people, want to make $750,000, right?
Or own a business of X size. Sometimes cash flow isn't even their priority.
Exactly. I mean, it's, they're all different. You can line up 3 different contractors, all that generate exactly $1 million in revenue. And their net cash flow at the end of the year can be very different. Mm-hmm. So it's obviously really important to be able to manage your business, select the vendors that you work with, in a way that provides you with the most net at the end of the day. So discussing with that buyer, what are your goals? Mm-hmm. What is it you want to accomplish? Because there are, you can find a business that does $1.5 million in revenue that has net cash flow of $350,000 a year, and then another one that's $2 million in annual revenue, and they have the exact same cash flow. Mm-hmm. So it's really being able to identify what's most important to them. What can they do? Mm-hmm. What kind of translatable skills do they have from their past where they can really come in, make the business more efficient, and to generate at the end of the day, the net goal is income.
Yeah.
Right. So doing as good a job as possible and making it as efficient as possible is obviously important. So I can work with them and providing them with some guidance in regards to, okay, if your goal is to have net cash flow of $300,000 a year, mm-hmm. this is probably the range that we need to be looking in.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, I think it comes back to the fact that you're a FedEx specialist. So yes, you understand the lending side, but you actually have seen enough of these deals and thought about this enough and researched it enough where you can actually provide guidance and give them another lens, another perspective of, hey, this is probably not the right deal. If this is what you want to be at, this might not be the best way to get there. And I think that's really helpful for buyers to hear from anyone else besides just them as they're going through a process.
Yeah, and that's exactly why 100% of what I do is FedEx, because I want to be able to be not just a lender, mm-hmm. but at the same time help them on the consulting side, the financial side, and really provide them with that guidance. Because most people, when they get to that point where they do want to buy a business, many of them do have some sort of finance in their background. Most don't, mm-hmm. right? So being able to explain that, how all the numbers work, explaining that it's very different than buying a house. It's a different process. So being able to explain that in a way that they really understand is important to me.
Okay.
Because I want them to go in with their eyes wide open.
Yeah, and that's the
really
goal.
Understand.
Yeah, everyone benefits if everybody's in eyes wide open, because it's when you run into the problem 6 months later that everybody gets upset. So
I agree.
Yeah. Now I know one of the things we always hear is that not every deal is SBA financeable. So what are the reasons that if you saw a deal that it might not be fundable through the SBA?
So on the surface, every FedEx business is eligible, mm-hmm. but then you got to look into more details.
Okay.
In regards to, usually size isn't really a concern when it comes to FedEx, but from a financing perspective, how long has the owner owned the business? Mm-hmm. We require 18 months of revenue.
Okay.
Right? Because we need to be able to ensure that what that buyer is acquiring has the historical cash flow to be able to not only service the debt, but also provide the income that buyer is expecting to make.
Yep.
So from an eligibility perspective, it's just that there's a few details that really have to be looked at. My opinion is there are some folks that will either indicate or say that they're not interested in SBA financing. Maybe a seller is not interested in SBA financing. I believe most of those circumstances came to fruition because they had a bad experience.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned before, my goal is to make them have a good experience, right? So I think most of the time there are situations where an individual was involved in an SBA transaction for FedEx, and maybe the individual they were working with at the bank either didn't know anything about FedEx or didn't know anything about SBA.
Yep.
Because you really have to know a lot about both. Exactly.
Yeah.
So what I often will tell buyers is, or I'll make an analogy, that if you needed open heart surgery, you'd go out and find the best possible open heart surgeon you can find. You would not hire a podiatrist.
Right.
A podiatrist could probably get you under anesthesia, probably even get your chest cut open, but after that, who knows?
Yeah.
So engaging a specialist, somebody that really knows the space, both from a FedEx perspective and an SBA perspective, is important.
Yeah. I mean, that's huge for every vendor that you work with in the FedEx space, but in particular lending, I've seen so many times where a bank tells someone that, oh yeah, this looks like a great deal. We could do this. We haven't done FedEx before, but we can do this. And then you find out like a week before closing that they actually can't. And that is the worst time to find out that you have to somehow find $1 million. Right. So I always value so much any vendor in this space that takes the time to actually research and understand FedEx, not just their part of the business. So that's huge. And I do agree with you as far as obstacles that by far the most common one we see when it comes to SBA eligibility is just they don't have the history. And it could be that they're selling a piece of the business, and it may be hard to identify the history for just that piece. But typically, it's that type of issue when it is not SBA eligible.
And when an owner is selling just a portion of their business and it's a carve out, we can finance those.
Okay.
It does require the seller to provide card financials, which basically separates the revenue and expenses, what's being sold, what's not being sold. So there is a little bit of extra work that comes into play there. And a CPA must attest to the accuracy of those numbers.
Right.
But it is possible.
Yeah.
I mean, we're working on 3 or 4 of them right now. So.
Yeah, perfect. Now, a lot of those are seller challenges that can kind of mess up SBA eligibility.
Right.
Are there things that the buyer can do or not do that can cause challenges in the process?
Well, first and foremost, they either have to be a U.S. citizen or have a green card.
Okay, I think that's
one of the
very important to call out. Yeah,
they have to be that. And so not only do they need to have the cash to support the equity injection, but they also need to have post-close liquidity. Because as a bank, we are not going to allow a buyer to put in every penny they have and then not have anything.
Yeah.
That just doesn't make sense. Not good for their family. So we go through a thorough analysis of what the buyer looks like from a financial perspective. Obviously, look at their career and what they've done leading up to that point. It's all important. And I talk to them very frequently that it's a puzzle, right? And sometimes it's about putting the puzzle and the pieces of the puzzle in the right space. And sooner or later, you find out, okay, this is how it works.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah. And sometimes that's the answer they need to hear too.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And whenever the answer is no, I try and make that no really quick.
Yeah.
So that they can move on and just change directions and whatever it is they want to do.
Go wherever, in whatever direction will get them to their goals. Now, so I think one of the things we often hear, and kind of correct me if I'm wrong on this, is it required to put your house as collateral for the SBA?
So SBA's rule is that if the buyer does own real estate and there is a unsecured portion of the loan, then it must be pledged as collateral.
Okay.
You have to own a controlling interest, right? So as an example, if you have a rental property that you own with your 2 brothers and sisters, technically you only own a third of it.
Yeah.
You don't have controlling interest. You can't be forced to pledge that as collateral.
Got it.
But your primary residence, that's in play 99.9% of the time.
Yeah. So anytime there's something unsecured as a portion of the loan, there's a very good chance that
And there's
your primary
always an
residence.
unsecured portion.
So yeah.
Because the fleet that's being acquired as part of the transaction, we're required to take at least a 50% discount on that value.
Got it.
So if the fleet you're acquiring is worth $500,000, the collateral value on that's only $250,000.
Okay.
So we take that $250,000 off the loan amount. That's how we derive the unsecured portion of the loan.
Gotcha.
So you can about 99.9% of the time count on it that any real estate owned will need to be placed.
Which is an important consideration when you're thinking about the SBA. It has a lot of advantages. That's one that people can be hesitant about, but at least
Right.
understanding before you get into it is important instead of it's less exciting when it's a surprise.
And it's, I am very upfront and communicate a tremendous amount at the beginning and try and make sure people are educated in what they're getting into.
Yep.
I also tell buyers, act like you're a 5-year-old, and when your teacher told you there are no dumb questions, there are no dumb questions.
This
So
is
if
a
you have
lot of
question,
money. Ask them questions on
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Ask as many as you can.
Yeah.
And I let them know, phone calls, texts, emails, whenever. That's part of what I do. So
Okay. So we've talked about some numbers, but just quick hard facts. SBA loan, 10 years. What else does the standard loan or loan rates and?
So yeah, 10-year amortization.
Yep.
As we discussed, no prepayment penalties, no balloons.
Okay.
The interest rate is based off of prime, which is indirectly set by the feds. The spread above prime is based on the overall strength of the project.
Okay.
And there's a lot of different numbers that come into play when we're analyzing the overall strength. From debt service coverage to buyer post-close liquidity are just a couple that go into that.
Okay. And so the rates can adjust over time with the SBA as well, right?
They do, yeah. We provide variable rate loans. So when the feds reduce interest rates, there's a corresponding decrease.
Yep.
Also, unlike the mortgage industry, you can't buy down the rate.
Gotcha.
That's
Can't
not
pay any
it's not
extra, yeah.
applicable. But with SBA loans, there are no origination fees. There are no points.
Okay.
Nothing along those.
No
lines.
origination fees,
And
yeah.
there's no fees. There's an SBA packaging fee, and if your loan is above $1 million, there's an SBA guarantee fee.
Okay.
But if your loan is $1 million or below, your SBA guarantee fee is zero.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think that's another myth is that there's tons of fees associated with the SBA as well.
No, there's obviously third-party reports that we must receive and review prior to closing, business valuation, equipment appraisal, site visit, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Credit reports, things like that.
Okay.
Have to be reviewed. And those reports have a cost to them. That's
Okay.
part of your closing costs.
Yeah. So we've mainly been talking about the SBA when it comes to funding an acquisition as a buyer, but I know that that's not the only way that you can use lending in the space if you're already a contractor. So I think one of the ones you mentioned that I wasn't super aware of is that you can use it as a pathway to restructure a partnership with an existing partner structure.
We can do a partner buyout.
Okay.
And whether you're let's say you're 50-50 and one of the ones wants to mostly exit, and you want to buy 40% of that
Yeah.
individual's 50%, we can do that. Historically, under SBA rule, you could not do a partial. Now, partial buyouts are applicable with SBA loans.
And is it similar rates and terms and process?
Typically, the rates are a little bit better.
Okay.
Because you've got an experienced operator.
Yeah, there's a lot more certainty than your ability to operate it. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And do you see those very often, or is it? It's fairly new, so.
I'm working on one right now.
Okay.
Where an individual owns 35%. There's another partner that owns 50%. So the 35 is buying the 50. So he'll end up being an 85% owner, and we're doing that 100% financing. There's no out-of-pocket expense.
Got it. Wow. Okay.
For the borrower.
That's great. One of the things that just made me think of that we didn't necessarily touch on are SBA loans transferable? If I was to buy a business that had an SBA loan on it, is that a financing pathway to assume an existing SBA loan?
They are assumable.
Okay.
But the bank that holds the loan has to approve it.
Okay. Yeah. Is that typically like a challenging approval process?
I've never been involved
Yeah.
in that process. I've heard that it's not exactly easy because if the loan that the bank holds is performing, they don't necessarily want to have somebody else in charge of repaying that loan.
Right.
It happens.
Yeah.
But I've heard it's kind of a difficult process.
Okay. Another one that I know is a pathway is either refinancing existing debt. Is that something that you see?
Yeah, we can. It might be for an existing contractor.
Yeah.
Might be vehicle debt.
Yep.
That we can refinance. Might be a seller note. Whenever they made the acquisition, they might have a seller note that they're repaying. Seller notes must have a 2-year repayment history before they can be refinanced.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because I know that's a pathway a lot of people end up taking to combine a couple of loans or maybe an unfavorable loan and try to get into one neck to choke, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So even if you bought a business and let's say you have a 5-year seller note, you get 2 years in and you want to refinance the balance that you would be paying over the next 3 years. We can amortize that over a full 10.
Yep.
So that balance that's associated with the final 3 years is now over 10 years. So if you're looking to increase your monthly cash flow for your business, there's no better way to do it.
Okay. Now, can you also finance the purchase of new vehicles through the SBA if you're already an existing contractor? Is that an option?
It's possible. It's a little bit more difficult because with an SBA loan, with something like that, we would have to have, basically a purchase order.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
The SBA loan process at its best is probably 5 weeks. It's a document-driven process, so we can move as quickly as we receive the information we need. Most people, if they need a new vehicle now, they can't wait for 5 weeks.
Yeah.
But
if it's a proactive purchase and they're getting ahead of things and it's a timeline,
if they can be proactive and they have the seller, whether it's an individual or a dealership, that can provide that purchase order, and we can finance that purchase order, we can do that.
An option.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Now, one of the things you said on basically on a good day, the minimum length of time for an SBA kind of transaction is 5 weeks. What's kind of the expected range you say there when you're giving it to somebody?
I would typically say 7 to 9.
Okay.
And more towards 9. And the reason being, as I mentioned before, it's a document-driven process.
Yeah.
Right. So, myself, our loan support specialists, our underwriters and closers, we're incredibly good at constantly providing updates to buyers and sellers in regards to what documentation is needed. Sometimes they're really quick at providing that information. Sometimes not. And people have lives, they have responsibilities, so I get it. But we can only go that fast. In regards to our process, the fastest one we've done was 36 days.
Okay, so that's your promise for everybody who's listening.
Exactly. And then the stars lined up, buyer and seller, highly motivated, very organized. We're able to, they engaged rush services on all services that could be rushed.
Right.
So it worked out.
Yeah.
But sometimes, a seller's CPA might be out of the country for 2 weeks, and they can't get this
out of the country. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't even want to know, but the longest that you've ever seen one of these take, the most painful one you've ever had. Just remember it for a second, then you can forget it again.
Just closed it in January. It was 15 months.
Whew. I'm sure that was exciting for everyone involved.
Lots of moving parts, lots of different reasons as to why all that happened.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. We stuck with it. Part of what it is we want to do is help people's dreams come true in becoming a business owner.
Right.
And we realize that sometimes it's going to take 6 or 8 weeks. Sometimes it's going to take 15 months.
Yeah, sometimes there are a few more hoops to jump through,
Exactly.
but you're there to help them jump through as many hoops as they're willing to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I really think that's a lot of the challenges that I hear all the time, some of the wrong things people say about the SBA and some of the things to understand. Now, you're in this industry, you're in the FedEx space. When you think about kind of the macro market or just what FedEx is doing right now and over the next few years, how old is GBank thinking about the FedEx space right now? Is it pros, cons, happy, sad?
Very bullish on it.
Yeah.
Obviously, the 2.0 integration is it's a challenge, but it's something that, as long as we're educated on, if it's already happened, when was it?
Yep.
If it's scheduled to be happened, when is it?
Yeah.
And then working within that space, because obviously we know with 2.0 comes some change, right? So we need to be able to identify if it's already happened. What did the business look like before? What does it look like now? If it's scheduled to happen in 4 months, that's a different story. We need to really be in data collection mode and find out what the expectation is. But if it's later in the year or even in 2026, not really much anybody can do about it.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that FedEx is hoping to have 2.0 about 80% done by the end of this year.
Yeah. I always, anytime FedEx has those claims, I say, I hope that's what you hit, but I always expect at least a year or two buffer on it. But that is what I would hope too. Yeah. So
So there's that. I would say another key point that some buyers don't pay as much attention to as they should is the working condition of the fleet they're acquiring. Because the bank's not responsible for that.
Yeah.
The seller's obviously not responsible. It's the buyer's responsibility. Inspect the fleet. If you want to hire an independent mechanic to go check it out, highly encourage that.
Yeah, I all but require it of people who come by through us, because, like you said, that is the number one complaint that we get from people, is that they say that the vehicles were in a worse condition than they expected. And that's why we're like, we can't be on site. Please have a mechanic go do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's just like if you bought a used car.
Yeah,
it's buyer beware.
Yep.
You should definitely be educated on what it is you're acquiring.
And if nothing else, it sets the foundation, the ground level for you knowing what to expect, so that you know what kind of repairs are coming and a timeline, and helps you accurately predict all of that. But sometimes you find things that if you can find it early, then it's on the seller, and it's a huge difference in terms of your viability there.
Yeah, we do engage a third party that goes to the terminal, takes pictures of the trucks, interior, exterior, license plate, VIN number, mileage. They do not start up the trucks. That appraisal has nothing to do with the working condition of the vehicle. So that is buyer's responsibility.
Got it. It's exterior, vents, all of that. Okay. Now we've spent most of this time talking about FedEx. Does GBank do lending for other types of small businesses that you might see at Route Consultant?
Yeah, we certainly do. Yeah, we certainly do. It is they're a little bit different, but so SBA lending is really about cash flow.
Yep.
It's about free cash flow and the historical cash flow's ability to repay the proposed debt, whatever that might be.
Okay.
So yeah, we can be very active in that space.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think as a last note, if somebody either is a new buyer or a current contractor trying to work with you, how early should they talk to you? What's kind of the first step to working with you?
Once I'm introduced to a new buyer through Route Consultant, sometimes they have a business identified that they are 100% on.
Yep.
Others, they're still trying to figure it out, still learning, looking at multiple businesses. And I'm willing to talk with anybody that's at either of those situations or somewhere in between. It's a process, and I can jump in when they've already got a purchase agreement signed and they're ready to go, or if they're still out there looking. I'm fine with either one. I like to be able to help educate those individuals that are still looking around for the right business, provide them with that guidance in regards to the financial side of it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I think that's every mystery about the SBA answered.
It might be, but I promise there will be new ones.
Yes, yeah. And
there's always something that comes up.
That's the joys of this space. Is it's always about learning what we can with what's happening now and being prepared for whatever happens next and being ready to react to it.
Very true.
So Tucker, it was a pleasure having you in the studio today.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.